There were two sets of bombers in Seattle. One set was connected with the SDS. I can't tell you what the acronym stands for, but these were the white radicals who were involved in the protests in the Vietnam War. Their objects of their bombing were basically at the University of Washington. They set one bomb in the stacks at the university library that killed several people who just were there sitting there studying in the library stacks. They also bombed the ROTC building. No one was killed in that one, but that was their focus. The other set of bombings were, well, I have to back up. Just before I took office, the head of the Urban League, a man named Ed Pratt, had been gunned down at his home. So that kind of set the stage because the person who the police believed did it and did not have admissible evidence to ever bring any kind of a case happened to be black. It was not a white person who was against him and his activities in the Urban League. Urban League has always been a relatively stable, reasonable an organization with spokesmen who attempt to and have over the years tried to make reasonable kinds of gains. But anyway, with that kind of as a background, the other series of bombings were basically centered around what we today would call the radical fringes of the civil rights movement. One of the bombings was at Senator Fred Doerr's home, who happened to represent the 37th district in the central area, white senator. And another bombing was at the home of the state representative, who I can't remember, Dave, and he promptly resigned. Fred Doerr resigned and left. And the persons who did these bombings accomplished what they set out to do, and that is to radicalize and to really create an aura of fear. We at one time, there was a big article in the New York Times saying that Seattle was the bombing capital of the country. We had more bombs per capita than any other city, including New York City. So between these two groups of what I just call bombers, they were regardless of what their purpose was, they were gangsters. They were engaged in illegal activities. So I called the police chief in one day, and particularly with this national press. It's not the kind of press we wanted to be getting, as we were trying to attract new businesses and trying to make a recovery from the Boeing layoffs and the consequent economic fallout. I called the police chief in and I said, I want this stopped. There's no reason to have this happen in our city, whereas it isn't happening the same magnitude in any other city in the country. So that's when they determined that there was going to be a bombing at the Morris Hardcastle Real Estate Company in the central area. There was some grievance about him. He wasn't black enough, and what I read in one of the, I think it was the facts or somewhere. And so the police were prepared when the individual, who happened to be a guy named Larry Ward, came there to set a bomb. He had a bomb with him, and he was in the process of lighting it when he was killed by the Seattle Police Department, and it was a major. Some of the black leadership felt that that was a terrible thing for the Seattle Police Department to have done that. The following morning, several of the black leaders, some of them very good friends of mine, and several of them still are, the ones who are still around, they called and demanded a meeting with me about this, what they call summary judgment. And so we scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. And I had the police department bring over photographs of Mr. Ward after it was not a pretty sight after he'd been shot. And we laid them on my table in the press room in the office, in the mayor's office. And they came in and, with literally dozens of cameras, all the television stations. LA Times flew somebody up, stringers for the New York Times and elsewhere came. And I heard these leaders portray their feelings. And after it was all over, I mean, I told them just frankly, we're not going to have any more bombings in Seattle. I said a bomber is a bomber, and the next person who sets a bomb, the same thing is going to happen, and I want you to look at these pictures. And there was this deadly silence in the room. And people kind of just filed out. And of course, you've seen the headlines where I was quoted as saying a bomber is a bomber in Seattle, and he won't be bombing anymore. And interestingly enough, we never had one more bombing in Seattle. We went from number 1 to the last place in the country. I still believe it was the right decision. I liken it on a very, very different scale to Mr. Truman having to make the decision to drop the atomic bomb. Saved thousands of lives and 2-3 years of prolonging the war. That was the decision that we had to make, and we made it. I would make it again. I was criticized roundly.